Verity, welcome. And after so many technical difficulties this morning, it's lovely to actually say welcome to the Man to Man podcast. You okay?
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
I can't believe the morning we've had.
Yeah, technical issues personified, aren't they? But anyway, we're here.
We're good to go. We're good to go. So, experienced teacher,
Yeah.
former SLT,
Yeah.
Costa Coffee addict,
I do
or
love
you
coffee.
do peach lover,
Very much.
all round good egg.
Oh, cheers,
Yeah.
babes.
What else would you add to that list to describe who Verity is?
I'm just me. What you see is what you get. I'm a wear your heart on your sleeve kind of girl. There's no hidden agenda. I'm a mum. I've got a tween son who's going to be a teen in a few weeks, and a teen daughter. I'm a friend. I'm a sister, a niece, an aunt, all those kind of labels. I'm just me.
And as you said to me earlier, quirky.
There's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
Individual, unique, one of a kind. My dad once described me as a force of nature, so I'll take that and channel that.
Yeah. It could be worse. There's worse things to be told.
Yeah. I'm going to choose to take that as positive.
I would. So, teaching for almost 20 years, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so long time.
Long time.
Not what you originally planned? Not the path you wanted to go down?
No way. My dad was a teacher. Everybody kept telling me I was going to be a teacher, and I wanted to do medicine. I wanted to be a doctor from the age of 4. That was what I was going to do. That was my driving force to get me through school. I was a goody two shoes at school. Worked hard, tried my best. Didn't get the grades that I needed for medicine, and was told I wasn't clever enough to do medicine, and was heartbroken.
Yeah.
And then I watched a program with my mum about personality disorders, and that was what I knew I wanted to do. So I did a little bit more research and decided that I was going to do clinical psychology, and started down that route. And then various life bits and pieces happen, and came to a detour in the road, and woke up one day and just knew I was going to train to be a teacher, an early teacher.
So from your parents' perspective, you got there in the end.
I did, yeah, I did get there in the end, and I love it. It's hard work. It's really hard work, but I love it. I love being on the shop floor. I love being with the little ones.
That's quite a journey though, isn't it? To go from always wanted to go into medicine and things from such an early age. And, when you were told then that they wasn't going to happen, that must have been really, really difficult.
It was gutting, absolutely gutting. And I felt lost. I felt robbed. And really downtrodden, really beaten, thinking this is what I've wanted to do all my life, and I haven't got the grades. I've been told I can't do it, and I won't ever do it. What am I going to do? But I'm not one to give up. I'm not a quitter. Very much a go-getter, and just thought outside the box, and started the clinical psychology route, and then took another detour.
Yeah.
Here I'm a dinosaur teacher, in my 20th year.
Yeah, they're very difficult subjects and topics and areas of interest as well, though, isn't it? I'm not saying that teaching teaching's a hard job, but not necessarily one where you have to be incredibly academic.
No, no.
Whereas if you look at the journey prior to becoming a teacher, that's hard. That is so. Why do you think you kind of veered off into the teaching aspect? What drew you into kind of that profession compared to the other ones?
I think the biggest thing that hit me is, after I graduated and I worked in various roles in the NHS and the private healthcare sector. So I worked in brain injury rehab, I worked in drug rehab, I worked in a secure psychiatric hospital, I worked with adults and young children with learning difficulties. I worked in an eating disorders environment, and I think the thing that tipped me over, that really got me thinking, was the youngest person I saw with an eating disorder was 8, and that was shocking. That was really, and I wanted to do more. I wanted to be on the shop floor more with young people. I wanted to let them know that they were amazing human beings, and I wanted them to feel empowered and want to go out and grab life with both hands and make it what they wanted to be, and not to have it taken away or sucked out of them. And if they came across a path that might take them down that journey, to be there to help them and to guide them to get back onto that path of loving and living life.
You can see just from the way you talk about it, how invested you are and how passionate you are. And it seems as though that in the jobs prior to that, you were always in that kind of capacity of like helping people, being around people. So that transition from your clinical psychology to teaching, isn't that big a jump with all the bits in between? Because you're always around people and helping people. So I suppose in that respect, and like you said from your experiences, that is kind of natural route, if that's where your passion lies, isn't it? So
I like people.
could I say you are now a published author? Do you fall under that bracket with your contribution to the Tiny Voice book?
Yeah, Toria Bonner's book, Tiny Voices Talk. I am chapter 8. She was a real advocate for me and helped me get my chapter published.
So your chapter being enough, what was the primary driver behind that? So obviously you've spoken already about your dreams kind of coming to an end, of being told that you weren't able to go on to study medicine because of grades and things like that. And is that kind of part of the not be enough story? And what else is there kind of behind that? Because, just thinking about my experiences and so many different aspects of life, you can feel that you are not enough or not good enough, or there's always something there that you can compare to and think, oh, why can't I be like that? So what's the idea of that chapter from your perspective?
I have to consciously tell myself now that I am enough, because I am me as I am. And if I don't like that, it's up to me to change that. It's on my shoulders. And therefore, I am enough as I am, whether I want to stay as I am or if I want to change something about myself to make it better or different. And it's a very active, a very conscious thing for me. And in terms of the realms of psychology, you've got a triangle of perceived self, actual self, and real self. And sometimes they don't all link. And somebody's perceived self and ideal self and actual self are very different to each other. And for me, there's so much competition, there's so much negativity, there's so much lack of responsibility and self-responsibility, and fear and nervousness and uncertainty in everybody's life. But I didn't want to live like that. I wanted to just feel safe and confident in knowing who I was and trying to be the person that I wanted to be. And that is who I am. What you see is what you get. There's no hidden agenda. And that is enough. And there are times when I really don't feel enough, when I maybe haven't, upon reflection, the way I've spoken to a child or dealt with a situation at school, and when you've got a little bit of distance, you think, oh, I should have done this or I should have said this. I can't undo what's happened. So it's a case of owning that and thinking about how to go forward in the best possible way, and taking that responsibility and knowing that. And I think for me, being enough means having ownership of yourself and knowing yourself and not afraid to be yourself. You could try to be who other people want you to be, but you can't keep that up. That's shallow, that's unsustainable, it's inconsistent. For me, being enough means that you know who you are and you stand by it. You've got the courage of your convictions and you're going to walk the walk and talk the talk.
There's so much that you said that we can really unpick, and I think the first thing is that the whole aspect of being enough and comparisons. Just thinking about kind of my life, straight away you've got that comparison of parenthood, even kind of myself compared to my wife, maybe, and like you said, whether it be dealing with certain situations or the way you speak to people and things like that. And upon reflection, oh, why can't I deal with that situation the way that she dealt with it? Or how do the boys do that for her but not for me? That kind of thing. And straight away you can get into that kind of idea of, oh, I'm rubbish, I'm not good enough, I'm not enough, that kind of thing. And we know that's not true, but that's the way your mind works sometimes, isn't it? And then
absolutely,
and you can
and
take that into work as well.
Yeah, and all we can do is do what we think is right and do our best. And it's
Absolutely.
not perfect.
And I suppose that leads into what you said as well about knowing who you are. That in itself, I think, is a very difficult thing as well, because knowing who you are takes a lot of kind of reflection and really looking at yourself and who you are, what you do, how you do it. So yeah, from that respect, I think there's probably a lot of people listening who think they know who they are, but really don't. And again, that links to something else you said about wearing masks and creating identities and these kind of ways of behaving and being that we can hide behind. You know, upon reflection of teaching, and I think wrongly now, it was described to me as it's all an act, it's all a show, it's all this kind of performance you put on every day. At the time, I was like, yeah, it is, yeah. But that's because I was creating this identity. I was creating the teacher persona where I would behave that way. And it wasn't necessarily me, but then it was something that you found that you had to live up to because that was what people was expecting of you. Now I'm out of that. I think, oh, no wonder I couldn't keep that up because it wasn't authentic. It wasn't original. I'm not saying I was a completely different person, but you do set yourself up to fail from that respect as well. So having that advice of it's a performance was probably one of the worst bits of advice I could have had. Yeah, you do on days kind of put things to one side and put kind of what you're experiencing and what you're going through to one side, and then you have to portray a certain character, but you can't do that all the time.
No, you can't. And the children they'll see through that. They're smart cookies and they're intuitive. And I'm really honest with my little ones. So I've taught reception year 1 and year 2. I'm currently teaching year 2, and I've loved every single year that I've taught. And I'm really honest with my classes. And if I'm not feeling great, I'll say to them, I need your help today because, or I'm feeling a bit grumpy and I don't know why. What can we do in our class to help me and anybody else who's feeling grumpy not feel grumpy? And one thing that I found is that as time's gone on, emotional literacy and emotional awareness and emotional understanding is diminishing. And in many cases, lots of things are shallow or an act, or be whoever you want to be. And you need to just be yourself and own that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a huge problem at the moment with the men and the men's mental health and that whole topic of masculinity, isn't it? You know, we do hide behind masks. We don't talk about the mental health, you know, because of the stigmas and because of the idea of the need to be stoic and that kind of thing. And just listening to what you were saying then about talking to your children and being open and honest and things, I don't think I can't imagine as many men in that situation, whether it be in teaching or in any other sector in their home life, where they are open and go, do you know what, I'm feeling a bit off today. I can't put my finger on it. I'm not feeling right. What can we do? Can you help me? That's not going to happen. That should happen. But the perception around that is that, oh, here we go. You know, it could be being really girly about it. Or,
and it's wrong. It's so wrong, because mental health and mental well-being is just as important as physical health and well-being. And it drives me potty that there is still a stigma about it, and the stigma is greater for men than it is for women. It drives me potty. And I felt that stigma. I suffered postnatal depression after my son was born, so my second child. And I was very aware of that, and I sought help very quickly. And I think having the psychology background helped with that, because I just rationalized what I felt was irrational. And externally it was irrational. I'd got everything that I could possibly want. I'd got a beautiful daughter, I'd got a beautiful son, I lived in a house in the country, I'd got a full-time job, all of those things. And so it wasn't rational to be depressed. But we know the theory, of postnatal depression, we know the theory of depression full stop, in men and women, and the different types of depression and the different levels of depression, and how that can affect people in different ways. And yet there's still such a stigma, and it shouldn't be, because if you're diabetic, you treat that in whatever way works. But if your brain is working differently, you need to do things to help your brain either work in a different way to make it better, or to work with what you've got to help yourself.
Yeah.
And that is a physical thing that manifests itself cognitively and emotionally and mentally. And so the stigma for mental health, you can see I'm gesticulating with my hands. I'm just getting, it drives me potty, because it's just as real. And it doesn't matter whether you're person A, person B, person C, where you live, what you do. It affects everybody, and it affects everybody differently.
So, the rational and irrational aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
From the outside, looking at someone, you can't see, first of all, can you? You can't see that the mental health issues that they may be having. That then, for some, would be kind of this irrational thing. It's not happening. Do you think it's maybe a lot down to as well that people who haven't necessarily experienced it, there may be some kind of naivety around it, or maybe a lack of awareness, a lack of knowledge and understanding? I'm not saying that's everyone who's not experienced it, far from it, but generally in society, there isn't that education around mental health. There's a lot more awareness of it now, and awareness is great, but there's still not an understanding behind that awareness. People know about mental health, people know there's stigmas, people know the facts and figures around it. They know that 75% of suicides are male, etc., etc. That's always out there now, and it's all over social media all of the time. So the awareness, yes, but I'm aware that there's jobs that, brain surgeons do wonderful work. I don't have an understanding and education of it, though.
No.
So do you think more needs to be done past the raising of awareness, so that we start to embed an understanding and have an education around it? Because we know that the waiting lists are huge for CAMs and things like that. It's more that we're putting out fires rather than putting a structure in place to reduce numbers in terms of mental health disorders. So what's your opinion on that, kind of past the raising of the awareness aspect?
I think we are aware to a certain level, and I think it's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable awareness, and when people feel that, there is a cognitive dissonance element to that, where they might intellectualize it rather than understand it. And there's I think there's a difference between intellectualization and understanding and having that connection and just being with people who are going through that. And that's really hard to define. I think the best thing that we can do is keep talking about it, because if we don't keep talking about it because of that uncomfortableness, it will disappear. And this is not something that is going to disappear. Our mental health and well-being needs to be at the forefront of everything, because that ultimately affects our physical health and our well-beings and our relationships and our behavior, and that's got a whole knock-on effect for society, full stop. So we need to keep talking about it and having it raised to consciousness, but also not just talking about it. We need training, we need educating, but again, that's on one level, that's an intellectual level. And not everybody works on a compassionate or an interpersonal level, but we do need training, we do need joined up thinking, we need massive funding. It's a hot topic of conversation, isn't it? We need massive funding, massive support, massive research, and much more joined up thinking and working together to help our young people who are the adults of the future and adults. Full stop.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense if I rambled on?
No. But you touched upon earlier as well that the emotional literacy, emotional intelligence, and how key it is to develop that at such a young age. If they can start to articulate, and understand themselves, how they're feeling, and be able to share that, but also to make it normal for them to share it straight away. Then you're hopefully bringing generations through who are more comfortable talking about their feelings, emotions, and being able to articulate when they're not feeling great, when they are feeling great, and just having that kind of more mentally healthy generation where it is normal. And I do understand there's more of it going on in schools and things now, but I don't know, I just think to some extent we're missing a trick in not making it the absolute core of the curriculum and everything we do. It's there, and obviously some kind of schools and organizations do it far better than others, but you could go into some schools and it'd be a one lesson a week job, rather than it being front and center and really driving it from there. But I don't know, who knows.
I feel that I work in a school and a trust that adopts the trauma informed approach and the PACE method, and we actively, and I know that I certainly do, but as a trust and as a school, we actively use the zones of regulation, and encourage the children to show their feelings and use the zones, and if they can articulate those feelings, and there's word banks and things to help them, and we can talk that through. But also for me, especially with the little ones, it's just acknowledging that it's okay if they're feeling something, but they can't put a finger on what it is, but it's blue or it's green or it's whatever color, and that's okay. All feelings are valid, and you might not understand why, but acknowledging those feelings and owning them, for me, is a huge step in developing that emotional literacy and that self-awareness and self-understanding, and having that right triangle of perceived self, ideal self, and actual self.
And I
and
think,
and, and who you are.
yeah, there's adults who are missing that important kind of link to the emotions and feelings, and the thing, you know, I've I've spent a long time of my life not really discussing emotions and not being able to verbalize it, and not really, I suppose, paying any attention to them. You know, looking back now, I was probably quite an anxious child, but you wouldn't have known it because I was never one who could verbalize it, or never kind of shared that with anyone. So, you know, what primary school, year 5, year 6, as football captain, football team captain. Okay, that's great. The problem there was, after you played games, you had to write a short report and read out an assembly. That terrified me to the point where I didn't want to go to school. Or I would find ways. It got to the point where my mum had to go into school and say he doesn't want to be captain of the football team anymore because he can't do the talking in assembly. So then, instead of them going, oh yeah, he doesn't have to do the report, I just said, okay, we'll pick another captain. So that was my first real, thinking back, that was my first real kind of realization of, yeah, because then there's other examples where I'd be asked to go and do things and go and speak to people, and it was completely the opposite end of the scale of what I wanted to do, but I was kind of pushed into doing it, and I felt like I had to do it because I couldn't verbalize where I was on that emotion scale and how I was really feeling. So yeah, that, only looking back now, I was thinking that there's so many examples from growing up where if I was able to verbalize, or if talking about your emotions was the norm, then I'd be in a far different place to where I am now, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think it's that, come back to that, the man thing as well, or generational thing, where growing up, it was never the thing to do, especially if you were a boy. You know, you wouldn't talk about your feelings, you wouldn't share your difficulties and things, even at a young age, really. Um, so yeah, I think whatever can be done to rewrite that kind of narrative, and not just for men, just for children across the board, isn't it? To give them the tools that they need, because they're always going to need it. There are so many adults without those tools now because they weren't given them when they were younger.
And I think I do wonder if it's an age and a generational thing, that it's still uncomfortable for many people my age. You're a bit younger than me, and I just think we need to normalize, take away the stigma that is there by talking about it. You know, everybody knows the importance of eating, you know, good food, drinking enough water, physical exercise. There's the theory of that helping your mental health and well-being, and then we'll just leave it at that. And it's not just that, it's so much more. And it's not a case, and you know, there's a whole field, the psychiatry, the psychology. It's not a simple black and white science, but removing the stigma and consciously talking about things and doing things like we do for our physical health, for our mental health, needs to become part of everyday life.
Definitely. Absolutely. So, Verity, we've already touched upon the concept of being enough and linked that to kind of your earlier career and the path you went down. But being a teacher is an incredibly difficult job for a number of reasons, and the expectations of, if you're a good teacher, you go into senior leadership and that kind of thing, where I suppose that road is already mapped out for you. It's the expectation.
Mhm.
Have you kind of felt that in your career, and that whole concept of being enough? Because if you're not feeling part of something in terms of your teaching and feeling valued, it can be a very, very difficult job to do, can't it?
Absolutely. I rode a really high wave for a long time. I had been teaching for 5 years, and fell pregnant with my daughter, and whilst on maternity leave, applied for a new job, which was a promotion to senior leadership. I'd not had any senior leadership qualifications, experience before. I'd led a subject, but this was the next stage. And who does that while they're on maternity leave with their first child?
Someone who's a bit bonkers.
Yeah, and in a different county, so I was, it was a different county. So I started. So my daughter was 9 months old, went back to work in a different school, in a new role, my first SLT role, in a failing key stage, knowing that we were going to have Ofsted in the next year, 18 months. And led a growing key stage, and had good Ofsted, really, really good Ofsted, and early years had its own section, and I was riding a good wave. Then started the MPQSL. I was the first cohort of the MPQSL. My husband was working away in China for weeks at a time. We were having building work done on our house. You name it, it was all going on. So I'd got a young baby, a husband who was working away, new job, senior leadership, MPQ qualification that had not happened before, new curriculum. Then things changed, and I developed the senior leadership role, developed to not just leading key stages. We had curriculum teams. So then my line management increased and became much more whole school, and was responsible for the early years, and English and French and music, and
Wow.
all of the arts across the school. And then had my son, and wham, I knew within weeks of having my son that I wasn't right. I wasn't. I knew I'd got postnatal depression, and I told my mum, and she was very supportive, and I told my doctor really quickly, because I knew I needed to get help. I just knew it, it's that physical health, isn't it? That mental health and physical health being linked, and owning it and taking responsibility. And I did feel shame, and I did feel guilt, and I did think, how can you feel like this when you've got everything? As an outsider looking in, there's no reason for me to feel that. But I went back to work after having my son, and I wasn't right for years. And the demands of the job increased, the expectations, and we're human, we can't do everything. So having ridden a wave, having taken a failing key stage from a low level to a I was proud. I'm not gonna shy away from that. I was proud of the work that had happened to take that forward. But there's only so much you can do. And I didn't feel enough. I didn't feel enough as a mum. I didn't feel enough as a teacher. I certainly didn't feel enough as a leader. I didn't feel enough as me, because I lost a sense of who I was. I didn't know who I was. I wasn't Verity. I was a mum. I was a teacher. I was a senior leader. I was a wife. I was all of these things.
You've been defined by the roles rather than who you actually are.
And that goes against everything that's important to me and how I want to be.
But that links strongly to knowing who you are.
Yeah.
All of those things are what you do. They are not who you are, isn't it?
No, and I'm not defined by that. And so I didn't feel enough in any department and any aspect of my life. And so I owned that. I knew that, and I tried to carry on. And I knew that that wasn't the best thing for me. It wasn't the best thing for my family. It wasn't the best thing for the children in my class. It wasn't the best thing for the school. And there was an element of pride in that, thinking I've failed, or I'm failing. I'm not living up to what I feel I need to be doing, what I should be doing. And that wasn't the case. I just didn't have the capacity. And that's okay to know that and to own that. And I made the decision to step down because I needed to regroup and rediscover who I was and not be defined by external things. You know, I'm intrinsically driven, not extrinsically driven. So yeah, I stepped down from senior leadership, and that was really hard because I love the whole strategic planning. I love the whole operational leadership and driving and taking things forward. And when I stepped down, I felt like a failure, a huge failure, personally and professionally. And it took a while to just regroup and remind myself of I am who I am, not what I do.
Yeah.
And
totally get that.
There are times now where I'm really excited for younger teachers who want to come into the profession, and they want to go up the ladder, and for them success is going up the career ladder. And that's not for me. I have thoughts about going back into senior leadership, but I don't think that I can give it what it needs without it affecting other areas of my life. And so I'm not going to do it because I'm not defined by my job or my role. And that's been something that I've battled with, and I have to constantly tell myself it's okay. You know, success isn't defined by promotion or being on senior leadership or not being on the SLT anymore. And there have been times when I've pretended it's been okay and I haven't felt it's okay. And there have been times when, and now I own that, and I'm not ashamed or embarrassed. I'm a class teacher. I'm on the shop floor. I've been teaching 20 years, and it's jolly hard work, but I love it.
Yeah, and there's no such thing as just being a teacher. There isn't,
No.
and that's something that needs to change as well. But there's a lot of what you've said there that I can really relate to. You know, I've left education for a year and a half ago, or I think I lose track of time. But after spending so long, well, I haven't left education, I left teaching. But after spending so long as a teacher, the whole, I was a teaching assistant, PGC, then 12 years or so as a teacher. Once you kind of have come out of that, and I needed to come out because of my mental health, and it was the right thing for me to do. But you still have those sorts of, I was a teacher, and I was really good at it, and not such a failure, but you've taken a step down, taken a step back. You're not, I wouldn't say not as important, would be probably the wrong phrase, but it's something along those lines. Am I making sense?
Yes, you
by
are.
saying that? Because 6 months before I had my first, well, before I suppose I went to the doctor about my mental health, I was having deputy headship interviews. Fast forward then, just after the pandemic and COVID, and I've left teaching. In the space of a few years, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, I've gone from looking at deputy headship and obviously further on than that, to then leaving the profession completely. And it's only since leaving the profession completely that I've realized that journey was mapped out for me. That was the expectation, right? You do well as a teacher, you perfect your craft, then you move on to senior management, then you move on to this. And that was always what I was kind of told, even from really, really, really early on. I'm in your, I would echo your thoughts and think, for me now, I didn't need to. That wasn't what I really needed, especially with the young family aspect and things. If I went back into teaching, it would be to be a teacher and to do the things you enjoy. I do miss the certain responsibilities and the pace and that kind of thing, because there's nothing like it, I don't think. You go from being completely busy from the time you go in to the time you come home, whereas now I'm in a much slower paced job, which is great, but it's not teaching. And teaching is where you get your buzz, you go into it because you're passionate and things like that. So it is different, and it is, I'm still adjusting to it, but I do feel that sometimes a bit of sadness that I probably won't ever go back into that role as a teacher. I think that is an area now which is done, and I've moved on from.
And what I've picked up on is the language that we've used about going back or stepping down. And it's not a case of going back or stepping down. It's a case of moving on. And we've used those words naturally, and that is linked and perpetuates a sense of feeling and a sense of failure. And I think it's really important to accept, and that's a massive thing to do. It's a huge thing to do, to accept that yes, you might once have worked as a teacher, but you need to consciously make the decision, were you a teacher or was your job a teacher? And that's really hard when in teaching it's a vocation, it's a calling, because the two are so interlinked. But I think it's really important to own the decisions that you make. And I had to work really hard to consciously tell myself that when I stopped being a senior leader, that wasn't a step down. It wasn't a step back. It was a conscious choice, a conscious decision that I made for the benefit of myself and my family and my class teacher. And it's all about understanding yourself and getting validation and recognition and a little bit of self-love, not getting validation from other people's opinions of you. And I think, again, that comes back to knowing what your values are, knowing what you stand for, what you believe in, and what you're prepared to live and fight for.
Yeah, I think you already said there about other people's opinions, and that's that uncontrollable, isn't it? You can't control what people are going to think and say, and but we do seek the validation of others, and we do worry about what their opinions are and what they're going to say, and I think that's a big part of it, isn't it?
It is a big. This is my mantra, though, that you are enough if you know who you are, if you know what your values are, if you know what you stand for, what you believe in, what you're passionate about, what drives you, and if that comes from you and you own that, no matter how big or small that is, that's you and you are enough.
I couldn't think of a better way to finish this podcast than with that ringing in our ears, that, you know, you've just encapsulated everything there. And I think where we look at ourselves and whether that be the jobs you do or the roles we fulfill, and it all comes back to that looking after ourselves as well, that being enough, knowing who you are and just owning it is absolutely huge. So
it's massive, and it's not a case of navel gazing. It's just a case of owning and knowing who you are objectively and taking responsibility for that, and knowing that you are a human being, not a human doing.
Nice. Put you on the spot for this last question then. If there are people listening now who want to kind of know who they are and start that kind of journey, what would you say to them? How could they start that reflective process in terms of and try to find out who they are? What would you say to them?
I think they consciously, and whether they do this physically by making a list or just consciously thinking about things, they need to think about what makes them happy, what truly makes them happy. Do they have a happy place? What is it about that place that touches their soul and speaks to their heart? What do they feel like when they're there? And then make a list of things that they like, whether they're physical things, because that will automatically then lead to psychological and emotional things. Because things that you physically like, for example, the beach is my happy place, and there's a certain beach in Cornwall, which is my beach. And the feeling that I have when I'm there, whether I'm sat down or whether I'm paddling in a pool or in the sea, or if I'm walking on the sand, I feel free. I don't have any constraints. The smell of the air, the sound of the sea, no 2 days are the same. So I've got my happy place, and there's no other word. I just feel unrestrained. I feel free. I feel liberated, raw, exposed. There is nothing there apart from me and the beach and the sea. And when you strip everything back and you take away everything and knuckle down to what it is that you like, what it is that makes you feel liberated and happy, then you can build on it. And then that will develop your awareness and therefore your understanding of what impacts that and how you can counterbalance that.
Yeah. Finding out what makes you you.
Yeah.
Find those pieces of the jigsaw.
Yeah.
Love it. We'll have everybody listening and go, right, need to do that. Need to strip it back. But Verity, thank you ever so much for coming on. I know we had a lot of technical issues this morning. We started a little bit later than we anticipated, but well worth the wait. It was great to chat to you. I know we've connected a lot on social media, but it's always even better to actually talk in person, so to speak, in person. But yeah, enlightening. You brought the sun out when it was raining here.
Woohoo!
Passion, enthusiasm is so infectious. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You take care.